Zelda, go do that right now. If you are watching my channel, you will love her channel. She does a lot of true crime videos, and I'm a huge fan of her work, and I'm super excited that she agreed to be a part of this video. I have known about the Jonelle Mathews case for a while now, and the last I heard, it was still very much a mystery, very much unsolved. And as I began researching it, I found out there was very recently a huge break in the case, and so I am super excited to be able to tell you kind of more of the story than I think is really out there right now. So let's get started. Today we are going to be talking about a Christmas mystery. Today's case is the disappearance of Jonelle Mathews. Jonelle Mathews was born on February 9th, 1972, and when she was just 1 month old, she was adopted by Jim and Gloria Mathews, and the couple already had a 4-year-old daughter named Jennifer. So Jonelle lived in California with her family when she was younger, but the family eventually ended up moving to Colorado when Jonelle's father, who was a principal, took a job there in 1978. Jonelle is described by her sister as being strong, independent, and very opinionated. She was a girl who knew what she wanted, and she knew how she wanted things done, and she was not afraid to tell you. So, I really get the impression that she's just this spunky, very strong-willed kind of girl. So, our story begins just days before Christmas in 1984 in the town of Greeley, Colorado, and Jonelle is 12 years old. Everything about Christmas, like the whole Christmas season, is very magical to kids, and there was a very special event coming up that Jonelle was super excited about. On December 20th, 1984, Jonelle's school, Franklin Middle School, was having their annual Christmas concert. Now, Jonelle had been a member of her school's choir. She was very heavily involved in it, and she had been preparing for this concert for months, and it was something she did not want to miss. So she really hadn't been feeling well in the days leading up to the concert, but her parents agreed that they would let her attend the event. You know how everything is just super chaotic around the holidays. There's like office parties and school concerts and events and neighborhood parties, and it seems like there's just way too much to fit into those couple of weeks. Christmas 36 years ago was no different, and the Mathews family was trying to figure out how they could be in 3 places at once. So, Jonelle's choir concert was being held at the Intra-West Bank of Denver on December 20th, the same night that her older sister, Jennifer, had a basketball game. friends were going to be there. She's a 12-year-old girl, and her friends are very important to her, and she's still very excited about the concert. So Jim Mathews drops his daughter off, tells her he loves her, and as he pulls out of Franklin Middle School's parking lot, he has no way of knowing that he would never see his daughter again. The Christmas concert goes off without a hitch, and when it was over, Jonelle asks one of her friends, a girl named Deanna, if she can get a ride home with her and her father. So they go and ask Deanna's father, and he's like, absolutely, we can take you home. So they drive Jonelle to her 2-story Clapwood home and drop her off. Now Deanna's father did notice that the garage door of the Mathews family home was open, but Jonelle goes inside and she flips on the light, and when he sees the light go on, he knows she got in there with no problems, and he doesn't really think about the garage door, and he backs out and leaves. He never thinks about that garage door again until it's too late. At 8:30 p.m., a teacher calls the Mathews home and Jonelle answers. So Jonelle's father was the principal of an elementary school, and this call was one of the teachers that worked at his school calling in sick. So she answers the phone and she takes the message and she writes it down on this notepad near their phone. Then Jonelle takes her shoes off that she wore to the concert. She puts on some slippers. She turns on the space heater that they had in the living room, and she's watching TV on the couch, curled up with her favorite pillow. This was exactly what she had promised her parents she would do. She had said, if you let me go to the Christmas concert, I will come home and take it easy. In the hour between when Jonelle spoke with her teacher on the phone and when her dad arrived at the house at 9:30, something happened. When Jim pulls up to his home around 9:30, the first thing he notices is the garage door, which is still open. So he goes into the house, maybe a little quicker than normal, and he begins calling out to Jonelle, but the house is silent. He looks into the living room and he can tell Jonelle made it home from the concert. Her shoes are on the floor, and the TV's on, the space heater's going. This is like Jonelle's setup. She sets things up in this certain way to watch TV, so he knows she made it home. Her shawl and stockings were also laying on the couch. Now remember, this is the 80s when people's first reaction wasn't foul play. People didn't immediately jump to that. So he thinks maybe she's at a friend's house or something like that for a minute. But right away, something kind of felt off to him. Jim Mathews said, after being home for about a half hour, I just had this really strange feeling, because our girls were very good about letting us know their plans by leaving a note or calling. So Jim kind of waits around thinking Jonelle will be home any minute. He butters around the house, he wraps some presents, but by 10 p.m. Jonelle's still saw anything. It wasn't long before we started thinking that this was probably not going to end well. Police immediately searched the perimeter of the home using flashlights, and they discovered footprints in the snow near a rear window, as if someone had been looking through the window before Jonelle disappeared. However, there were no witnesses. There were no fingerprints. There were no tire tracks. The shoes Jonelle had worn that night to the concert were in the house, but what wasn't found in the home were Jonelle's slippers. It's December in Colorado. It doesn't make sense for her to have walked out of the house in the snow wearing slippers. Unless, of course, she was forced. Jonelle's sister Jennifer later told the Colorado Sun that Jonelle was a very dramatic girl. If she would have run away, she would have left this long, dramatic note, letting everyone know why she was upset. Investigators also noted that it was possible that there was a gas can missing from the home. This would later lead to speculation that perhaps Jonelle's remains had been incinerated. Because police hadn't shown up to the house until around 10:30 p.m. and it was very dark, an official search didn't begin until first light the next morning. Now there were people, neighbors, people from their church out there looking for Jonelle in the dark. But it was very dark and it was very cold and they found nothing. So, while all of this is going on, Gloria is in California and she has no idea her daughter is missing. And so her husband has to call and tell her the awful news. And I cannot imagine as a mother a more horrible feeling than knowing your child is missing and you're not there to help look or to try to figure out what's going on. Like, that had to have been the most terrifying, helpless feeling ever. First thing the next morning, a search begins and the FBI shows up to assist in the search for Jonelle. Police and federal agents were questioning everyone in Jonelle's life. She's 12 years old, and that is pretty young for a runaway, but they have to consider that scenario. They're talking to friends and family, and not one person believes Jonelle would have run away. This he was not the only parent that police were keeping tabs on. And I'm not talking about Gloria, Jonelle's mother. I'm talking about Jonelle's birth mother. Jonelle's birth mother had been just 13 years old when she had given her daughter up for adoption. And while the Mathews had always been very open with Jonelle about her adoption, it hadn't been an open adoption. Jonelle had nothing to do with her birth mother. They had never met. There was no communication, nothing like that. However, Jonelle had expressed interest in meeting her birth mother. So, police began to wonder if maybe her birth mother had come to town just wanting to get a look at Jonelle and decided to take her. Police watched Jonelle's birth mother and kept an eye on her father, Jim Mathews, for months, but they never saw anything that made them believe that either one was behind Jonelle's disappearance. Because of confidentiality of the adoption, her birth mother was never informed about the sad fate of her daughter. So, basically, while police had nothing on Jim, they kind of ruled him out, but they were kind of still suspicious of him. Jim was given a polygraph shortly after Jonelle went missing, and a few months later he was asked to submit to another polygraph, and at this point he kind of got angry and he was like, look, I understand you need to rule me out, but you're not looking at anyone else, and someone has my daughter. And I can imagine how frustrating it would be to be the only person of interest and just sit back and watch police not look for any other leads because they kind of have their sights set on you. On February 9th, 1985, a huge search for Jonelle was conducted, and this was on the same day that Jonelle would have turned 13 years old. The search was the largest in Greeley's history up to that point, but even with over 600 people searching for Jonelle, searching for any clues, they found absolutely nothing. And months would go by and this investigation was just kind of stuck. In mid-1985, the Greeley police got notified by the Weld County Sheriff's Office that they may have something kind of tied to Jonelle's case. So, I guess a dog had come home one day with a piece of human scalp, carrying a piece of human scalp. It was a 1 to 2 inch piece, so it was very small, and the owners of the dog realized what it was and called police. So this hair was sent to the lab for testing, and in October of 1985, the lab announced that the testing had come back inconclusive. This was before DNA testing, so I'm not sure what kind of testing they were planning on doing, but I guess they did ask Jonelle's mother to come in and look at this hair and see if it looked like Jonelle's hair. So she did go in and she said that the color was off and she did not believe that the hair belonged to her daughter. Sadly, Jonelle's case went cold for years and years. Finally, in 1992, police officers in South Dakota called Greeley police to inform them that connection between this guy and Jonelle because he was super suspicious, but they were able to prove he was nowhere near Greeley at the time, and this was just another dead end. 10 years after Jonelle went missing, she was illegally declared dead. It didn't seem as though her case would ever be solved, and her family tried to come to peace with that. They had a memorial for Jonelle and tried their best to say goodbye without a body or without any idea of what had happened. The family knew at this point it was likely they would never know what had happened. 2 years after Jonelle's memorial service, something happened that would kind of rip this wound open again. Jonelle's birth mother hired a PI and tracked down the Mathews family, and then she wrote them this letter saying that she had really wanted to meet her daughter. And this was when the Mathews family had to tell Jonelle's birth mother what had become of that baby she put up for adoption. Jonelle's case stayed cold for 30 years. The town of Greeley, Colorado would never forget the young girl, but the town really began to change. Dirt roads and thirsty fields were paved and crisscrossed by busy streets and housing developments. What had been farmlands and ravines soon became groomed parks. Jonelle's family moved away. In 2018, Greeley police reopened Jonelle's case. They wanted to get a fresh set of eyes on the case that had haunted the town for 30 years. And soon, police would have not only a person of interest, but a possible set of remains as well. But I am going to go ahead and pass you over to Zelda ASMR so you can hear how this story ends.
We left off in 2018 when the Greeley, Colorado police decided to reopen Jonelle Mathews' missing persons case. Detectives stated that they believed someone in the community knew what had happened to Jonelle, and so they started to concentrate their investigation on the Christmas concert that Jonelle had taken part in right before she disappeared. They released a home video that was taken of the Christmas concert the night Jonelle went missing. The video tape is currently still posted on the Greeley, Colorado Police's Facebook page, so you can check it out if you want to. And it started with a message saying, on December 20th, 1984, Jonelle Mathews disappeared from her residence in Greeley, Colorado. This is the last known video taken of Jonelle. In the video, you can see Jonelle standing on a staircase along with a lot of other girls her age singing Jingle Bells. She is wearing a red shirt and a blue jumper or sweater, however you call it. Less than an hour later is when Jonelle went missing. Police also began inquiring about a man from Idaho named Steve Banky. They named him as a person of interest in Jonelle's disappearance, not immediately as a suspect, just a person of interest. The Mathews family said that they did not know anyone by that name. They didn't know a man named Steve Banky, and they didn't know him from looking at him either. But there are a series of connections between him and the Mathews family, one being that they attended the same church, and then also that they only lived about 2 miles apart from each other. I'm not entirely sure how this worked, because from what I know, when you attend the same church, a lot of people tend to know each other. Like, it's not usually a huge group, and people tend to know other people from their church. But I don't know how big this church was and if they attended on same days. I have no reason to question the Mathews family not knowing him. I just found it interesting that they attended the same church. But the Mathews family claims that they do not know Steve Pankey. Then in July of 2019, police got a huge break in the case. Just 18 miles south of Greeley, Colorado, some oil field workers were digging a pipeline. And they reported to law enforcement that they had uncovered human remains. These remains were discovered at an oil and gas site in rural Weld County, an area that had a lot of oil and gas wells and some other facilities for energy development. However, back in 1985, when she went missing, this area was just acres and acres of fields. They were able to positively identify these remains as belonging to Jonelle Mathews using her dental records. Her cause of death was labeled as a homicide, and the method was a single gunshot wound to the forehead. Now, they did release an autopsy report, but it was heavily redacted. A lot of information was kept out of it. I assume that was done so that when they interviewed a suspect, they would sometimes reveal information that only the killer would know. Like if it wasn't released to the public, then they would only know that information if they were the actual killer. So I assume that's why they redacted it so much. It said that following the discovery of her remains, the bones were discovered or were examined thoroughly. The bones were found in a body bag and were wrapped in a white bed sheet, and they had been mixed with dirt and debris. The bones were then separated and x-rays were taken, but the results of any testing or findings have been redacted from the autopsy report, so we don't know any of that information. Police were never able to confirm how long Jonelle's remains had been there, but they were able to say that they had been there for a very long time. So they can't positively say that she was buried there as soon as she went missing, but it had definitely been a long time. When the remains were found, only bones were left behind and some pieces of her red and blue clothing. Once Jonelle's remains were discovered, they searched Steve Pankey's home. Now, according to Steve, they took a CD disc from his son's funeral. They took some papers, they took some pictures of his family, they took tax things, they took stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with this, is what he said. During the search, neighbors described police seeing toting brown paper sacks of evidence out of Steve Pankey's house. Police said that Steve had lived so close to the Mathews house, and he had also been inserting himself into the investigation. He had done this many times over the years, claiming to have knowledge of the crime, and it kind of grew inconsistent and incriminating over time. And I found this in a lot of cases I've researched over the years, that police always say if someone inserts himself into the investigation, they automatically become a suspect because they are very often only involved because they want to keep on top of what police have found and whether it can possibly lead to them as the killer. Basically what happened was that as soon as Steve Pankey was named publicly as a person of interest, he began doing a lot of interviews with the media, telling his side of the story when nobody really asked for it. Like, police had not named him as a suspect. He was just like proactively trying to get out of it. In interviews, he said that he never met the Mathews family before. He said that when the night Jonelle went missing, he was at home with his family. A weird thing in the interview is that he very his car on the night Jonelle went missing. He said that his family was leaving the next morning to Big Bear Lake for Christmas and that his car was packed. And he mentioned this many times. His car was parked in the driveway. It was jam-packed, packed to the brim, almost to make it very clear to everyone that there would have been no space in the car for him to put a body in. And it's always weird when people, I can understand it, okay? I understand that he knows he's being looked at and he wants to make it abundantly clear that he had nothing to do with this. But it's a little bit weird, I think, always when people just volunteer this information without being asked about it. So he says that he's home, looking outside, watching the snowfall. Again, very detailed because his family was going to Big Bear Lake the next morning and he wanted to keep an eye on the weather. He said as he was looking out the window, a police car pulled into the driveway and he said, another arbitrary charge is coming my way. Apparently, he had a pretty checkered past with the Greeley Police Department, and he thought that they were there to charge him with another thing. He had worked as a youth pastor at a local church and had been accused of sexual assault in the past. The charges had been dropped, but he was still on edge over it. He also had some charges brought against him for harassment, speeding, and making threatening phone calls to a family member. So, police had charged him with a lot of things over the years, and he thought that's what they were there for, to charge him with another thing. So he thought it was an unmarked police car pulling into his driveway, but he never actually knew it was police. Nobody got out of the car. Nobody came to his door. He said the car stood there idle for a while and then backed out and left. The next morning, his family got up and left for Christmas vacation. And according to him, no one in his family knew anything about a girl gone missing until they returned to Greeley the day after Christmas. He also talked about a weird conversation with his father-in-law, who he had been estranged from. But on December 27th, he shows up at their home and tells Steve that he has a body that needs to be buried in a casket and that it would look bad for Steve. Steve says that when his father-in-law showed up and he asked him, "Are you wearing a wire?" thinking the police had sent him to incriminate him in some way. And then his father-in-law left. This is kind of a weird part of the story. He said that he didn't know what was going on, so he called a lawyer to consult, and the lawyer advised him to go to the police and tell him about the weird encounter with his father-in-law. So instead of calling the actual Greeley police, he called the FBI, claiming that because of his past with the police, he didn't feel confident talking to them without getting accused of something, so he went straight to federal agents. I don't know the relationship with his father-in-law, right? I mean, if he was estranged, I'm guessing it was bad. I find it interesting that he mentions him as coming over and being like, there's a body in the trunk of my car, and if you don't help me bury it, it's gonna look bad for you. Essentially saying, I'm gonna go to police and accuse you of doing this. How weird is that story? I mean, police were looking at Steve as a person of interest. He's been doing everything to separate himself from this missing girl. But then all of a sudden, he claims that his father-in-law, who he hadn't seen in possibly years, showed up with a body at his door, which puts him back into the middle as a person of interest. I find it such a strange story to just offer up. So the FBI took his statement. During his interview with the FBI, they don't just take a statement and then let him go. They're actually very interested in the story that he has to tell and also kind of confused. So they start asking him a lot of personal questions, trying to see if he has any connection to the Mathews family at all. So it turns out that when Steve Pankey worked as a youth pastor was the same one the Mathews attended. Which again, I think it's strange that the Mathews family didn't know him because he didn't just attend the same church as them. He worked at the church. But yeah, I don't know. Another possible connection between Steve and Jonelle's case, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it is still a connection. Steve Pankey actually had history with Jonelle's friend's father, who dropped her off that night at her home. After the Christmas concert, they had worked together in the past. So during his statement, he tells agents again that his family had been on a trip to Big Bear Lake from December 21st to the 26th. However, they later questioned his wife. Now, she did confirm that they were on that trip, but she said that it was a very last-minute decision from Steve and that it wasn't a long, planned-out trip. She said that at the last minute, he dumped their family dogs, and then they just all got in a car and drove off, and that he was very uncharacteristically listening to the radio all the time, trying to get news on Jonelle's disappearance. He also gave them his alibi in a written document with the detailed plans for his trip, but they were full of inconsistencies and false statements. Police also noted that Steve reached out several times over the years trying to make contact about Jonelle's case, again inserting himself into the investigation and trying to find what information they had found in the meantime and if any of it would link back to him. Eventually, Steve, his wife, and his son moved out of Colorado and ended up in Idaho, where he joined the Mormon Church. At some point during his conversation, he was asked by a bishop if he needed to confess anything, and he told the bishop that when he lived in Colorado, a girl had gone missing, and he was still very bothered about a conversation that he had with someone after she had gone missing. It was pretty vague. But the Mormon Church leadership ended up passing this information along to the Greedy police. Another piece of information I actually find interesting. I don't know how the Mormon Church works. I don't know if they're subject to the same rules that the Catholic Church is, but normally what you confess to a priest is private, and they're not allowed to share it even with police. I know that when you share details to a therapist, for example, about wanting to harm someone or having murdered someone, they are allowed to bring that information to police to protect the public. But I'm pretty sure a priest is not. So I don't know how it works in the Mormon Church, but I find it interesting that that bishop took that information to police. After they searched Steve Pankey's home, things kind of quietened down in Jonelle's case, and nothing really happened for a while. Nothing was ever publicly revealed to the media about any progress made, and people began to worry that it was going cold again. But then, almost 35 years later, on October 12th of 2020, police arrested Steve Pankey for the murder of Jonelle Mathews. He is facing charges of felony murder, kidnapping, and 2 violent crime sentences. Steve Pankey is believed to have kidnapped Jonelle at gunpoint from her home after seeing her being dropped off alone. What he was doing near her house, I don't know. I don't know if because he worked with her friend's father, saw him at the Christmas concert and followed them home. I mean, she was doing the Christmas concert. He worked at the church at some point. Maybe he was there and followed them home. A few weeks ago, on October 30th of 2020, Steve made his first appearance in court wearing an orange jumpsuit and a face mask. Obviously, a pandemic going on. The judge ruled that he would be held without bond, and his trial is set to begin in 2021. The Mathews family faced so many false alarms over the decades investigating Jonelle's murder. They are very relieved that something is happening in it. You know, every time human remains were discovered or police interviewed someone new about this case, they got their hopes up, and then it was always brought down again. Finally, having her remains, being able to give her burial, closed at least part of the chapter for the family until someone is convicted of this. The family has described Jonelle's remains being found as a miracle. Her sister Jennifer said, "The fact that it was found in that exact pipeline location is a miracle, because if they had dug 1 foot to the left or 1 foot to the right to lay this pipeline, they wouldn't have found them." Her parents, who were retired in the meantime and had moved to Costa Rica, returned to Greeley after her remains were found to hold a funeral in celebration of Jonelle's life. Jonelle's birth mother had also come into the picture and had become quite close with the Mathews family since her hearing that Jonelle went missing. She also attended the service, and the family never got to see their daughter grow up or date or get married, and they're just really thankful to finally have some closure. Jonelle's sister said that the fact that it happened and that we know she was now murdered was a gift for us, not knowing anything for 34 years. And now we know who possibly killed her. It is another gift to our family. We know that it's because of people working for many years, and we know that we are blessed. And that is all there is in this case.
Thank you guys so much for joining me for another holiday homicide. I want to give a huge thank you to Zelda ASMR for joining me. I would love it if you guys would leave a comment and let me know what you think of this case. And make sure and